Hey friends, welcome to Halfway There. This is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. We try to answer the question, what's God doing? What's it actually like when we go through the hills and the valleys of life? Friends, I'm your host, by the way, Eric Nevins. You guys know me, and I'm glad that you're here. So today, if you haven't, I want to just encourage you to go out to halfwaytherepodcast.com, hit that link for 8-day experience. I've been putting these out every couple weeks for the last month or so, and I'm hoping that you will check those out if you're looking for something a little bit different in your Bible study time, something contemplative, something that gets you really thinking and into the Word in a way that you maybe haven't done before. Today, I'm excited to bring you my guest. She has been through all kinds of things in her life. She is retired and does a lot of work around the world. Actually, she'll tell us a little bit about that, and I can't wait to hear her story. She is Idella Kercher. Idella, welcome to Halfway There.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for allowing me to come and share.
Yeah, I'm so glad to do that, and it's really great to meet you. We met through Tanya. I know her, but I couldn't think of her name. Through Tanya Blessing, and who's a couple-time guest on this show. So I knew that if she said we should hear your story, that God's done some amazing things in your life. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing now, and then we'll go back after that.
Okay. Well, today I'm a retired person. Love ministries and love especially to work with women, and have been involved in quite a few right now. I am working with a ministry called Thrive, and I'm excited. In the next few days, I'll be going to one of their international retreats where they host global women working in really difficult places sometimes, and put on a retreat where they have counseling and some soul care and fun and worship. And it's an exciting time, and I volunteered with them several times. This will be my third time internationally with them.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So this is a ministry to women who are on the mission field or working in other countries, right? And so just a chance for them to take care of themselves a little bit and get some rest and relaxation.
Yes, and that's so important, because statistics would say that people don't last on the field very long because there's quite a bit of burnout. And as investments are made in them, it's hard if you lose them really in a short period of time.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into that whole process, whether it's fundraising or, you're moving your family overseas. I mean, that's a big deal. And so all those things, if you lose, somebody just burns out, it's kind of a lost investment. But also, if God's called them somewhere, they need to be there.
Right. And, it takes a long time to learn a different language and to get your, kind of get embedded in their culture. And so you want them to be able to stay longer.
Yeah.
Realizing it's difficult.
Right, absolutely. But the reality is they are making a really tremendous sacrifice for the gospel. And sometimes it's for a short time and sometimes it's for longer. But either way, they need to have that kind of encouragement and just pampering, maybe. Self-care, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's so important.
I love that. Well, I love that you're doing that and you have the time to do that. It sounds like you've been on a couple of different trips, which is really cool. I want to go back into your story. So I know that you grew up in a Christian home, and you were that family that was at church every time the doors were open almost, right? So what was that like when you were growing up?
Well, we went to church, probably 3 times a week. I don't know that churches are open as much as they used to be, but you would go twice on Sunday and once in the middle of the week.
Yep.
And probably as I was growing up, I didn't appreciate that so much, or sometimes didn't appreciate having to go.
Right.
But I have found in later life that foundation, just that foundation in God's Word has continued with me. And, you hear it and it stays with you. Doesn't, what is that verse? It doesn't it come back to you void or something like that.
Yeah. It says, I want to say that's in Isaiah somewhere, that the word of the Lord doesn't come back without producing the result that he intended for it. So yeah, it sounds like you got a really good grounding in kind of in the Word. You gave your life to Jesus as a young girl at 9 years old. What was that like?
Right, and I don't think that because I had been so grounded in it, there wasn't a big experience. Sometimes I wish I had a wonderful experience that I could share with people, like people that come to know the Lord later on. But for me, it was just really so part of me that it just was so easy just to say, make that commitment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've learned from doing this show is that generally the people who, I'm like you, I grew up in church, gave my life to the Lord early. And those of us like that often wish that we had a more dramatic story to share with people. But the people who really have the dramatic stories, I mean, I've interviewed one guy who gave his life to Christ while doing cocaine, all night reading the Bible, right? So crazy story. I guarantee you, if he could have the story that you just shared where he knew Christ his whole life, he would take it. So I think it's awesome that, you had that sort of grounding as a kid. You gave your, profession of faith. That was good. So it sounds like, and then you were in Young Life as a teenager and in high school.
Right. I went to Young Life in high school and went on to work in a Young Life club. When I went to college, I went to a Christian college. It's now Point Loma University. It wasn't named that when I went, but went on to work in a Young Life club, came back after college and continued to work in a club. Probably was involved with Young Life pretty heavily into my 40s.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. What was it? So what was it about that program that really invested in you so much that you wanted to stay involved with it all that time?
I really just liked the way that they want to earn the right to be heard with young people, and they walk beside them. And I think there's a wonderful community of Young Life people. It seems like almost everywhere I go, I bump into people that have been in Young Life at some period of their life.
That is so true. And I think even some of the stories on this show bear that out. Like, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who have either been in leadership or, gone into ministry with Young Life or came to Christ through Young Life. I mean, that's pretty profound.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it was something, it was something when people were going into different things in high school and all, it was a group of friends that were just wonderful to stay with. And it has played out in my children's life and my grandchildren's life as well.
Oh, yeah. That's an amazing impact. I love that. Okay. So I want to get into some more of your own personal story with the Lord. So do you remember a time when you learned something, like when you were either like just reading scripture voraciously or you were digging or learning something in a Bible study or something that really kind of became a foundational idea for you, or just, kind of changed your whole idea of who God was?
I think that my relationship with God deepened as in my 20s when I experienced a loss. I don't think until late into my 20s I had ever experienced a loss. Things had gone so perfectly for me or easily for me. And so, you know God and you have committed your life to Him, but I didn't really know that I really needed him as much until I had a baby that died. And, gone through a hard pregnancy to deliver a baby, and then he didn't live very many days. And that was a time when I really had to call on the Lord just to support me and to fill me. And
Yeah. Well, tell us that story. If you were okay doing that, give us, just take us into that moment, kind of what that experience was like.
well, I lost baby, and it's a very hard time because it seems like when that happens, everywhere you go afterwards, there are people with babies, and and so you feel pretty empty. And at the time, I was chairing Christian Women's Club, and it was just shortly after this experience when I was there, and a speaker said God was in his heaven and all was well with the world. And I sat there feeling like I don't know that's I'm feeling like everything's well with the world.
Yes.
And I found myself just really praying that if this was God's plan for me, that I had already had one child, and if it was his plan for me to have another one, or was his plan for me not to have another child, I just needed him to fill my arms and fill my empty arms, and I needed his presence more. And it was that time when I felt like I really surrendered and said, "It's okay, God. I want to follow you, whatever it takes."
Mm.
And it was just an incredible experience for me to look back on now, because we had applied for adoption before I had that pregnancy, and then gone through the 9 months of the pregnancy, and thought we could go back and talk to the adoption agency, and they'd be real ready to let us have a baby, which they weren't. And so it just seemed like God just opened door after door after I made that surrender pretty quickly, where the adoption agency transferred us to a new caseworker who was a Christian. And, just thing after obstacle fell until we were approved to have a child. And the day we were approved, and this seems almost impossible, but they remembered that they had a baby girl that they'd forgotten. She was 3 months old. And they'd kind of forgotten they had her in a foster home. And so we got approved one day, and we got her the next, which was an incredible miracle. And as I, look back in hindsight and look at her, I just see how God's plan was there for me. She's been such a blessing in my life, and just has, you couldn't ask for a better child. So that has been just a real sign for me of how God cares for us.
Yeah. So I think that's so interesting. I'm not going to say that there's a causal relationship at all, but I think your ability to, be in such pain, obviously it's so difficult to lose a child like that. The moment, I don't have to tell you, but I'm sharing with our friends, when you're waiting so long to have a baby, and it's just a time that's just really full of expectation, and then to lose that, it can be very hard. But to come on the other side of that and to surrender to the Lord like that, that's a really profound moment, Idella.
It was, I think the beginning of a real time of being able to just trust God. And there's been many other things in my life that I've needed to go back. I know in Joshua 1:9 it says, "Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid and discouraged." And I've held on to that so often.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great, encouraging verse. In fact, I wrote that verse we were doing some tile in our mud room where we come in from the garage all the time. And I wrote that verse underneath one of the tiles, be strong and courageous, because I wanted to just have that kind of embedded in our house, knowing that those times would come. Well, so you said that was kind of the start of your surrender. Like you obviously that's a big one. You had the Lord brought you another baby girl. What happened after that, and so what else started to make you trust, or what other ways did you have to trust the Lord?
Well, it wasn't too many years after she was born that I realized there were some real cracks in my marriage. And I think that can even happen when you lose a child. But had to really, press into the Lord with that, with knowing that there were things about my marriage that weren't right. And I think it is still this way today, but back then, nobody I knew had ever been divorced. It was pretty in the Christian world. And I had this feeling that good Christian women don't get divorced. So I stayed a very long time, or a long time that I probably wasn't healthy for me. And I remember, some of your listeners might remember Dr. Grounds, Vernon Grounds, who was president of the seminary, good friend of mine. And I know at one point he said to me, and this was at close to the end of my marriage, he said, sometimes you just have to cut off an arm to save your life. And I had to come to that really hard decision that, I was in a really unhealthy situation, unhealthy for me and unhealthy for my children.
Wow.
And so went through a divorce, which, was very hard for me to do. It was hard for me because I had also gone through a cancer, having cancer, parathyroid cancer. So, there's a lot of fear there. There's a fear that how could I even survive on my own? And was doing a lot of Bible study and in the Word a lot then. And I know I came to Isaiah 40:10, and I love this in the Message, where it says, "Don't panic, I'm with you." And I felt like I was really panicking there for a while.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a thing that happens, especially when we're going through hard times like that, where our brain puts us into like that fight or flight mode, right? And so, a message like "Don't panic, I am with you" is a really powerful reminder that we can just dial that back and trust the Lord. Wow. So I want to know what it was like, because I don't know, depending on, I don't know all of our listeners, all of our friends here listening with us. But, I don't know if it's such a different culture today, so can you take us into some of that culture where divorce was just not even a common thing, or like it wasn't the thing to do, and then why that would have been such a troubling, thing to even consider?
I think back then it was just really hard in the Christian community. I think it is a little bit still today, because my heart is really with women because of the several things I've been through. And so I really like to see women reach their potential and grow and all. And as I've watched them, I think sometimes it's really hard, because I think in the Christian community, back then at least, they didn't quite know what to do with you. How do you, where do you fit, and how do you fit in? And so I have, and still do, wonderful friends that walk through that with me. But, there were some that, you wouldn't always get invited to things. You wouldn't, you weren't a couple anymore. And that was hard to be single in that respect.
Yeah, and that still happens, right? That's definitely a thing. It was one of the problems, divorced people go through. I watched my parents both go through that. all your couple friends you kind of lose because they don't know, they don't want to take sides, and it's kind of hard.
It is hard, and it's hard to invite a single to a
Yeah.
outing sometimes, and so you don't quite know how to handle that.
Right. And it's, yeah, it just can feel kind of awkward sometimes. And yet, those are the people who need community most,
They
yeah.
need it the most right then, and sometimes can feel really isolated. I hope that I'm more sensitive to people, or people going through that, because I know it's really a hard time. I don't think you ever do that easily, or don't have a lot of hard times to go through when you go through a divorce.
Yes. That's the one thing I'm so glad you said that, because I think if you've never had that kind of, relationship where you're like, no, I actually need to not be in this relationship, even though, we had planned to be together forever. I think the thing that gets glossed over or missed, is that, yeah, okay, we can go through hard times, but the reality is sometimes, nobody does that decision lightly. Sometimes this is the right decision. You have to make your decisions wisely and with the Lord. And you got some very good advice, I think, from Dr. Grounds. He was at Denver Seminary when I was there as the, I forget what his role was, chancellor or something. But I've always looked at him as a picture of sort of spiritual maturity, somebody who really knew the Lord and just kind of exuded the love of Christ. And so it sounds like he even
Right.
offered that to you.
Right. He was a wonderful friend, him and his wife. And, that was really good advice, because it was something I struggled with. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It was years in the making.
Yeah.
Because of that. And, I've always had my favorite verse, I think, is Jeremiah 29:11, because I've had to hold on to that so often, where where God says, these are the plans that I have for you, to prosper you and not harm you, and to give you a future and a hope. Because sometimes you don't feel like you have that future and hope.
Right. And sometimes you have to just trust the promise.
Right.
That no, the Lord does have plans for you, and you can trust Him. And you've already seen His provision in some ways. How did that experience, seeing His provision with your child? Was it daughter?
Right. It was a son.
Oh, a son. Okay, son. How did that experience change how you went through the later hard experiences?
I think that it taught me to really go to the Word and spend time in the Word. And, I can remember just eating up the Psalms at that period of time. I mean, at the period of time in my marriage, where I just spent so much time in the Psalms and really crying out to the Lord, and really, feeling a comfort from Him and a peace. I mean, I think that you can find joy in a lot, in times when you go through hard times. You may not be happy, but you can have joy that God gives you.
Yes. Well, and that's the thing I like to talk about, because, you can't learn that unless you go through the hard times, right?
Right.
So you have to experience it. Yeah, I don't even know. I want to ask more about how that, do you have a specific story about a time when you were reading a Psalm and it was like, oh, God is going to be with me. This is okay. Or it expressed something that was in your heart?
Well, I can just go to the point where I was kind of at the end there, and was talking to a friend on the phone, just crying out. And I had, over that year, the year when all of this kind of came to a head, I had 4 major surgeries. So I was, not quite myself either. And I remember the man in a Sunday school class that I was going to came by to see me, and I said, I just want my life to have smell better. I want to have that beautiful, fragrant aroma that the Bible talks about. And I said that to him. And then as things really unfolded in my marriage, and I, found out about unfaithfulness and stuff, I was praying with a friend of mine, and she said, I just want to, I don't know what to say to you. Let me just go pray for a while. And she came back with that in the last chapter of Philippians, where it said that your sacrifice, and I'm not saying that I had a great sacrifice, but it said, your sacrifice has a sweet smelling aroma, and my God will supply all your needs according to his,
Yeah.
I can't remember the words right now.
No, that's good.
But from that point on, I don't know that I held it right there, except for the assurance that God had me and that he was going to care for me. And, as I look back from where I'm at now, he has overabundantly supplied my needs. He's gone far above just my needs in taking care of me, it seems like.
Yeah. So I know that you mentioned to me before that, as your marriage is falling apart, you're worried about how I'm going to take care of myself, what's going to happen. You had some remarkable circumstances that you said could only be attributed to God. Tell us that story.
Okay, so
Thank you.
I was a core leader in community Bible study and went to leadership one morning and said, I just really need to find some bookkeeping or some kind of work to do. And a woman that I was just getting to know then went home to her husband, who had just started a software company, and that was back in the beginning of software. You didn't have software packages you didn't hear about that. But she went home that very night, and he said to her, you wouldn't know somebody that could do some bookkeeping because we need that. And so the next day he called me, and I went to work for him and worked for him for almost 30 years in a software company that, went from one person to 9,000. And I was their first employee. And it then went on. It's part of Oracle software today. It sold to Oracle, but, went through, a lot of exciting times in the software business. And the wonderful thing about him was that he had this culture document that we lived by, and every employee heard it and, knew that this is what he lived by. And the number one thing they had in that culture document was to honor God in everything we do.
Oh, wow.
And he honored God so much, and the company was blessed so much. But in that, I was blessed so much, from being there at that time.
Yeah.
Just
so
personally and financially, it took me from being a real ordinary person into really having an extraordinary life, I guess you would say.
Yeah. So can I ask what time you were working there? What years? I know you said 30 years, but when did you start?
I started in 76, and the company was sold in 2003.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So that's like the golden years of being in software, right?
Right. I mean, the years working up to the year 2000, when companies were worried about the century code and all.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was where, and then the company was the first company to have a package software where we, had things that worked together, like finances that worked with distribution and manufacturing and so forth.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I think it's pretty easy to look at that, and it's easy from here, but to look back and go, wow, the Lord knew that industry was about to take off. Right.
Right.
and put
And
you in the right place at the right time to not just provide for you, but provide for you abundantly.
right. And I go back to that verse in Philippians where he said he'll supply all our needs, and just he really did. I had a divorce. I think I got 2 months of child support was all, and so
Wow.
but God just supplied all of our needs so miraculously, and he brought the owner of that company and his family into my life, and the way he honored God was, and does still today, is just an inspiration for so many. And so it was really an inspiration. And I really learned a lot, about generosity and many different things from them.
Well, tell us about that. How did you learn about generosity?
Well, and I've been involved in generous giving and generosity for a long time, but I think I learned it from him, from the man I worked for. He was at the barber one day getting a haircut, and they were talking about, giving and tithing and all. And the barber said to him, well, you don't tithe for other people, you tithe for yourself so that you're not, you don't have greed, and it doesn't allow greed to take hold in your life. And that was such a great example to watch him and his generosity to employees, to others. That we started a company foundation where we gave a percentage of our cash change every year into a foundation where we really focused on inner city giving, and primarily we gave in Denver, although we were an international company and did some things in other cities. But that was just such a great example of somebody that really walked the generous life, to watch him and to know him today even.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so what have you learned about yourself through all of this?
I've learned that I'm kind of weak and I need a savior for sure. I need somebody to care for me. That has been a big thing. I've learned about myself. I don't know. That's a hard question.
Yeah.
But I've learned I've had wonderful friends, Christians in my life. They have just enhanced me so much. I learned, about myself, how much I love. And I think that your passion and what you want to, if you think about your purpose and your passion, it kind of comes out of pain a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so, I've developed a real passion for women and for women that go through hard times. I have a passion for women that are abused, women in the workplace, just to see them grow and change. Because back, as I started work, women weren't in software very much. They don't go into math and sciences that much. And so,
yeah.
I just have, through myself and my experiences, have just loved to see women blossom and grow. And even today, and thinking about women that are trafficked, that's a big problem and a big issue.
Oh, yeah.
And I have a real heart for that.
Do you know Jeff Brodsky?
No, I don't.
With Joy International? Okay, I thought he's in town here. I thought you might know him, but
I think I've met him once.
Oh, yeah, okay. He told me one time, or I might have heard him when he was speaking once, but he said Denver is the fourth largest place for trafficking in the country.
And that's true. We have some major highways that come through here, and it's hard to think about it. It really is hard to think about.
It's unbelievable.
And I've heard that over in the Denver Tech Center, it's really big in some of those hotels there.
Oh,
And
wow.
I spent my career in the Denver Tech Center. So to me, that's a shocking fact
Yeah, it's just
to think about.
kind of an unbelievable thing. So how do you help them, or what do you mentioned that you're helping women in the workplace. What's your method of doing those things?
My method, I just love people, and I love women, and to see them grow in the workplace. We did several things, but I was a mentor. I really tried to mentor, and I still talk to the women that were working under me back then and encourage them. And I have gone on to mentor a lot of people. So working with them directly, I've worked with Providence Network probably for 25 years, and they have a home for women coming out of abuse. So,
Oh, yeah.
I was, I believe in giving your time as well as, as financial to help these organizations that are, giving so much to help people.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Providence has people coming out of abuse, not only the abused women, but they also have people coming out of addiction.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Well, what do you think is next for you? Where do you think is like, when you look at the future, what do you want to see as maybe your legacy or your impact?
Well, I think right now in this part of my life, part of my legacy would be my grandchildren. I just want to see my children and then my grandchildren, grow up with a heart for the Lord, and to become generous and to become giving. A couple of years ago at Thanksgiving, I gave everybody these little generosity cards that I had that gave you something you had to do every day. And it wasn't all financial. It was, to encourage somebody, to find somebody that needed something. Or there were times when you give to somebody else's charity, and it was so fun to see the kids go through that
Yeah.
month and then come back and tell their stories at Christmas, just to hear what that, how that changed them in thinking.
Oh, I love that. What a practical little way to just influence who they become.
Right. That I have shared that with a lot of people because it was a great experience as a family to do it.
Yeah. And then just to encourage them to share. I think that's so powerful. Obviously, this show is all about sharing our stories, to let it out there, because when we do, it's powerful. Most of the Bible is narrative, and that there's a reason for that.
I love people's stories. That's one of something I just love.
Yeah.
My grandkids think I ask too many questions of people, but it's just because I love to hear about them and love to hear their stories.
Yeah, that innate curiosity, I think, is very powerful. Well, Idella, is there anything else that you want to leave us with?
I can't think of anything. I shared that. I think I showed you that little poem that my mother always recited.
Yes.
And I don't know that you want me to tell you the whole poem.
You feel free if you'd like to.
But I do like that. I do like it because it's. I think it was by Corey ten Boom, and it's life is but a weaving. And I like the fact that it really makes sense what it says. Life is but a weaving between my God and me. I cannot choose the colors. He weaves so steadily. Oftentimes he weaves the sorrow, and in foolish pride forget he sees the upper and I the underside. Not till the loom is silent and the shutters cease to fly will God unroll the canvas and reveal the reasons why. The dark threads are as needful as in the weaver's skillful hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern he has planned. He knows, he loves, he cares. Nothing this truth can dim. He gives the very best to those who leave the choice with him. And I think that says it so well, because I don't think we always understand when the threads of our life are dark and we don't understand them because we're looking at that underside. But he knows what's necessary to weave a wonderful pattern of our lives.
Amen. I love that. Idella, thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your story here. You've been through a lot, and I know that God has been faithful, and you've learned to trust Him through all of it. That is a beautiful testimony to the rest of us, no matter what we're going through, to trust Him as well. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for giving me this opportunity. I appreciate that.